Today, we're tackling something that might surprise you a bit. We're looking at the Bible, specifically Genesis, but maybe not how you usually think about it.
Right. You know, the big question for you right off the bat is probably why? Why look at the Bible this way for insights about humanity?
Yeah. What's the value in it for you?
Well, this approach, biblical humanities, it uses historical context, literary analysis. It really digs into the deep well of human struggles, questions that are embedded right there in the text.
It really does. So our mission today really is to get beyond maybe the familiar Sunday school versions and dig into Genesis more as, well, a historical and cultural document. See what it shows us about us as humans.
And we're even starting with that very well-known story, Genesis 1, the creation story.
The classic.
But there's a pretty surprising historical backdrop that it really throws the meaning into a whole new light.
Okay, surprising context. Tell me more.
Well, what might be really eye-opening for you is that Genesis 1, it wasn't written, anywhere near the supposed time of creation.
Really? Not like at the dawn of time?
No, not at all. It actually came together much, much later. Probably around the 6th century BCE.
The 6th century BC. Okay, hold on. Let's unpack that.
Yeah.
So this foundational creation story, it wasn't the first word maybe, but a response. A response to something else that was going on.
Precisely. You've got it.
So what was happening then? What made the 6th century BCE so significant for this story?
This was a time of just profound crisis for the Israelite people. It was the Babylonian exile.
The exile.
Yeah. Their kingdom destroyed, their land gone, the temple in Jerusalem. The absolute center of their religious and cultural life was in ruins. And many of them were taken as captives, forcibly relocated to Babylon. It was a complete shattering of their world, their identity.
I can't even imagine losing your homeland, your sacred center.
Yeah.
That kind of upheaval. It must have forced them to ask some really deep, fundamental questions.
Absolutely. Who even are we anymore?
Right.
And it was right there in that crucible of devastation that the need to write down, to organize, to systematize their stories, their traditions, it became urgent.
To hang on to something.
Exactly. The core question just echoing through everything was, who are we really and where did we actually come from? They desperately needed a narrative, to make sense of this chaos and reclaim some sense of who they were.
So facing this void, they look back to their foundational stories to find answers to themselves again. Now, you mentioned earlier there was a rival creation myth, the Babylonian one.
Yes, and this is absolutely key to understanding Genesis 1. The Babylonian Empire, the superpower that held them captive, they had their own very powerful, very dominant creation story. It's often called the Enuma Elish.
Enuma Elish, okay.
And you need to understand, this wasn't just some quaint myth. It was their state ideology. It was the bedrock story explaining how the world worked, how society was structured, and crucially, humanity's place within it.
Okay, so paint a picture for us. What did this Babylonian story say? How did things begin according to them? And what was our role, humanity's role?
Well, it's quite different from Genesis. The Babylonian myth starts with chaos and violence, a great cosmic battle between the gods.
Right.
And the world itself is created from the corpse of a defeated goddess, Tiamat, who's torn apart. So a pretty violent, chaotic origin.
Definitely a darker picture than Genesis 1.
And crucially for humanity, in the Enuma Elish, humans were created almost as an afterthought. And specifically, they were made from the blood of another defeated, rebellious god. Their sole purpose, to be the laborers, the slaves, essentially, for the gods.
Yes.
To do the hard work, dig the canals, build the temples so the gods could, relax.
Humans as slaves, created just to serve. That's starkly different from the image of God idea.
Exactly. Miles apart. And this Babylonian creation story, it served a very clear political purpose for the empire.
How so?
It justified their rule. It reinforced the idea that subjugated peoples, like the Israelites held captive, were naturally meant to serve. Their servitude was built into the cosmic order, divinely ordained even.
Wow. So the message was basically, look, the universe itself says you were made to be our workforce.
That's the underlying ideology, yes. Your place is to serve us, the rulers favored by the real creator gods.
Okay, so now Genesis 1 starts to look really different.
Doesn't it?
It's not just this peaceful account of creation in a vacuum. It's written against that backdrop. It's a counter-argument, a form of resistance.
Precisely. It's a powerful counter-narrative. It's not just about how the world was made, but why, and what that says about human worth.
So contrast it for us. How does Genesis 1 push back?
Well, first, instead of cosmic warfare and chaos, Genesis 1 presents this orderly, intentional creation. God speaks, and things come into being step by step. And repeatedly, God calls it good.
Order instead of chaos, intention instead of violence. Got it.
But the most radical part, the absolute game changer, is that declaration. Humanity is created in the image of God. Tselem Elohim.
In the image of God. We hear that phrase a lot, but in this context, hearing it against the idea of humans as slaves.
It's revolutionary. It's saying, no, you are not slaves by design. You are not defined by your servitude to an empire. It's asserting an inherent dignity, an intrinsic worth, a reflection of the divine in every human being.
Not just kings or rulers like some other ancient cultures might have believed.
Exactly. Not just the elite, humanity. It was a direct, powerful challenge to the dehumanizing Babylonian ideology. This idea, this incredible concept of being made in God's image, it wasn't just abstract theology. It emerged from this specific, painful context of oppression as a profound statement of human value.
So the core message is this incredible affirmation of human dignity, born directly out of suffering and resistance against being treated as less than human.
That's the heart of it, yes.
Okay. Now, the source we're looking at also raises kind of an ironic point, doesn't it, about how this powerful message of liberation, of human value, was sometimes, well, twisted or maybe misinterpreted later in history.
Yes. That's a really crucial and maybe uncomfortable point to consider.
What happened?
Well, the source highlights how, at various times within Christian history, the focus shifted. Sometimes the emphasis on God's glory became so overwhelming that, perhaps unintentionally, it could start to overshadow or diminish the inherent value and dignity of individual human beings that Genesis 1 proclaimed. Human worth could feel secondary to this abstract concept of glory.
So the idea meant to lift people up could, in some interpretations or applications, end up almost pushing them down, making them seem less important in themselves.
It's a tension that has existed. Think about, say, certain aspects of medieval European society. While obviously grounded in deep faith, sometimes the structure of religious authority or the intense focus on the afterlife or the church's power could lead to situations where individual freedom, individual worth in this life, felt less significant. People could, in a way, become means to an end again, whether that end was defined as God's glory by those in power or the institution's goals, rather than being valued as ends in themselves, as Genesis 1 originally suggested.
That is. Yeah. That's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
That the message born from fighting oppression could somehow be flipped.
It shows how ideas can evolve and, unfortunately, be distorted.
But the source also connects this to the Renaissance, seeing it as a kind of pushback against that diminishment.
Exactly. That's the interpretation offered. The Renaissance, with its explosion of art, science, and humanism.
Yeah, the focus on human potential.
Right. It can be seen, at least partly, as a reaction against systems or ways of thinking that might have suppressed individual value. It was a reclaiming of that inherent human worth, that potential, that dignity, which, ironically, has its roots right back in that Genesis 1 declaration, a kind of human liberation movement, reconnecting to that ancient affirmation.
Wow. So there's this incredible arc from the crisis of the exile, leading to this radical statement in Genesis 1, through periods where that message maybe got clouded or misused, to a kind of rediscovery or reassertion of that core human value during the Renaissance.
That's the thread, yeah. So sort of pull it all together for you, Genesis 1, it's so much more than a simple how the world began story.
Clearly.
It was this incredibly bold declaration of human dignity forged in the fires of the Babylonian exile, a direct response, a challenge to a powerful, dehumanizing imperial ideology. And understanding that historical context is just absolutely vital to grasp its true revolutionary punch.
It really does change how you hear those familiar words, doesn't it?
Okay, so thinking about this original purpose, this declaration of human value when things were at their worst, here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Knowing this history, knowing the why behind the story, how might that change how you receive or interpret Genesis 1 today? Does it land differently?
And maybe even more personally. How might these ancient ideas about what it means to be human ideas born from such intense struggle and resilience, how might they still be subtly shaping how you view yourself and how you view others, even now, maybe in ways you haven't considered?
It definitely makes you think how these very old roots might still be influencing our modern debates and feelings about human value, dignity, purpose, understanding that history, like we've tried to explore today, it just offers such a valuable, maybe even necessary perspective.
Absolutely.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.